I've titled this sermon, It's a Beautiful Thing. It could be titled Extravagant Love. It could be titled Right Priorities, I think. I mean, there's a couple different things I think this could have been titled. But, you think of a fire, just real quick. Hopefully this analogy kind of makes sense and drives us where we're going here. But a fire in the right place is a beautiful thing, right? Right, in the fire pit in the campground, it's a beautiful thing because there's something kind of magnificent about watching the flames. There's something magnificent, even more so, about when it's a cold night and you feel the heat from it. But it's a beautiful thing because it's where it should. It's good. It's in the right place, and right. I mean, it's the priorities all right there because it's burning just the wood, not everything else. You think back a year ago for us, many of us, we struggled with, is Glide going to be around anymore? Right? Because the fire was not in the right place. And that was not a beautiful thing. It created more chaos. It created suffering. It created hardship. And it opened the opportunity for future struggle to change people's lives in a very negative way. It was not a beautiful thing. The priority of the fire was in the wrong place because it wasn't in a place to create something beautiful. Doesn't mean that God's not going to use it for a future, to build Glide Up, which I think He has. He's given us an opportunity as a church to be able to reach out to a lot of different people, to honor a lot of people, to meet people that we've never met before. And really even to get the name of the church out to the point where we have the opportunity now to point them to Christ, because in some way, shape, or form they've come in contact with us and our location of Glide Baptist Church. And I think of, like with worship's a beautiful thing. It really is. When we worship in a right way, it's a beautiful thing. It can bring about beauty. It has a lasting impact. It can leave a legacy. It can turn something from ugly into something good. It can bring joy in a time when there is a lack of happiness. It can bring hope in a time when all things just seem to be going bad. It can bring camaraderie and fellowship when you hear that voice next to you worshiping God, unashamedly singing out. There's something encouraging in that for the person next to that person singing. Worship can be a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing when our kids honor us and obey and follow what we ask in the direction we give. It can turn out to not be a beautiful thing when they don't do that. I mean, it's when things are done right, when there's the priorities are right, when it fits in how it should be, it can be a beautiful thing. When somebody loves you in a way that is right and good and the way God has led us, it's a beautiful thing. When we give, when we serve, it's a beautiful thing. But in that, sometimes what we do is this. We give God our leftovers because that's what we have, because our priorities are kind of screwed up. And we're not putting God first, we're putting something else first, but we're still doing our devotions maybe, we're still maybe praying, maybe we're still going to church, maybe we're even serving. But it's not out of giving our first fruits, so to say, towards God. It's out of we're doing it because either A, we got a little bit extra time, maybe B, we feel burdened to have to do it, instead of it being an act of, I want to do it. Can it be a good thing to serve God out of an act of, well, I need to go do this? Yes, it can. But I would like to submit this, that I believe it's a much more beautiful, better thing when we do it out of want, and our motive is I'm doing this because I want to give Christ my life. I want to give him what I got. I'm not going to give him just part of it. I'm going to give him everything. I'm not going to give him my leftovers of, hey, I've done all my work for the week. I've got all those things done. Okay, now I can go serve God. And I think our passage this morning actually is a pretty clear picture of this. Of a woman who was willing to cross cultural lines. She was willing to do something absolutely ridiculous, reckless, and what looked irrational because of her love for Christ. And I guess the thing I would like to question us with is this. Are we willing to be ridiculous, reckless, and irrational for Christ? Are we willing to do things that just don't seem like common sense? Are we willing to pour out our all and give our all, surrender everything, surrender our all? Like the song we sang last night, You Are My All in All. Is that true? And I would ask that we would search our hearts and our motives this morning in those areas, in every area of our life. It's like the song, The Heart of Worship, coming back to the heart of worship. The heart of worship it's not, I'll bring this song. I'm going to bring more than a song, because the song in itself is not what you require. What is it that God wants? Our hearts. But what it is, it's worshiping Him and making Him the priority, being about Him, and less about the act. Now the deeds that we do, those are important. Don't get me wrong on that. But the motive behind it really does make a difference. When your kids obey you, or when somebody does something nice or kind for you, because of love and because of honor, because of respect, there's something beautiful in that. But if you guys that are parents, if you remember back to the time when you wanted your kids to do something and they only did it because they knew they were going to get in trouble, they knew they were going to lose something, there's something less than in that action they give you. It's not as beautiful. So let's open up to Mark 14. We're going to read verses 1 to 9. As you're turning there, we're kind of in Mark. We're at the last 3 chapters of Mark. We're at the final moments of Jesus's life. The last couple days before he goes on the cross, before he dies, before he rises from the grave. And Mark is going to jump in pretty quickly. And he's given us a good picture, I think, of somebody who does something beautiful and then a whole bunch of events of betrayal to Jesus. So Mark 14, 1 to 9, it says, "It was now 2 days before Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The leading priests and the teachers of religious law were still looking for an opportunity to capture Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the Passover celebration, because they all agreed if we do it, the people are going to riot. Because there were a lot of people that were following Jesus. They saw something in him that was what they were looking for, that they were hoping for. Now, a lot of them missed it because they thought he was going to be the Messiah who was going to come in and he was going to conquer, and he was going to do it right then and there, and it was going to be a physical, political kind of a conquering, where Rome was going to be dethroned and Israel would be put back into power. There were some that saw it that way. There were some that understood. They were grasping, hey, that this Jesus guy, he is the Messiah, but he's going to die. I don't think they fully grasped the part of the dying and rising, but they heard his words, and they were holding on to some of those words. And this woman we're going to read about in a minute, I do believe that she she started to get it. Because then it goes on, it says, meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. And the thought is this could be Mary, Martha, and Lazarus' father. I don't know about that. But we definitely know that he was a leper at some point. Most likely, Jesus healed this guy. And so Simon is throwing a banquet, a dinner for Jesus. So that they're at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. While he was eating, a woman, catch this, came in. She was on the outside. She came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume made from essence of nard. She broke open the jar and poured the perfume over his head. Some of those at the table were indignant. And that word indignant right there, by the way, is not that they were just upset. These guys were furious. They were disgusted by what she just did. Why waste such expensive perfume? I wonder how that made Jesus feel. Why are they wasting this expensive perfume on you, Jesus? Right? It could have been sold for a year's wages and the money given to the poor. So they scolded her harshly. But Jesus replied, leave her alone. Why criticize her for doing such a good thing to me? And other translations say, why criticize her for doing such a beautiful thing or a beautiful deed? You will always have the poor among you, and you can help them whenever you want to. But you will not always have me. The idea is here with me, or here with you. She has done what she could, and has anointed my body for burial ahead of time. I tell you the truth, wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed. A beautiful thing. She did a beautiful thing. She crossed a cultural line, by the way. That was a big time no-no. Simon had this dinner at his house. Jesus is probably at the table. And typically what they do is they'd kind of lay down. They'd have one arm out, or they'd have some kind of cushions that they could sort of lean up on, but their feet were typically behind them. And they were all gathered around. And it would typically have been probably a bunch of guys there with Jesus having dinner. And the women would have been the ones to bring in the food. And they would have been serving these guys at the time because the men were meeting. So for this lady to have done what she did, she crossed all kinds of cultural lines. The culture was not more important than her love for Jesus. And she came running in to make sure that she could honor him, to pour perfume on his head, and as John says, to put it on his feet. But then it goes a step farther in what she did, right? She took this vial of perfume, which we don't quite understand, I don't think, what this truly meant when it says expensive perfume, unless if you caught this phrase. They said, why would you waste such a perfume like that? Because that is worth, anybody know what it said? A year's wages. Think of your guys, your wages that you make for a year. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of food. That's a lot of clothing. That's a lot of shelter. Right? That's a lot of being able to help people. That's a lot. And she was willing to pour all that out to honor Jesus. And I was reading something that talked about it. Actually, I think goes a step farther than that. It's a possibility that this was her dowry. She was not married, and typically a woman would have a dowry of some sort. The dad would make sure that she had something to give to her for her future, for the marriage that she would have for herself also, but also for the marriage. So there's a good chance this may have had more than just a memory to it. This may have been something that meant her ability to get married. And so she was willing to take that and put the possibility of being married aside in order to worship and honor her God, to put him first and foremost in all of it. That's a beautiful act. I mean, if you really think about it, that's a ridiculous, totally, absolutely reckless, irrational response. But oftentimes that's what worship is. Worship is a response of, we don't care what other people think or say. I'm giving myself to God. He gave his all for me. I'm going to respond with my all back. I'm going to give my first fruits. I'm going to give myself, even if it means I may lose something in the process or I might not get in the process, I'm going to give myself to him, for him, to be used for him, by him. And that's in a lot of people's eyes. That can be reckless, ridiculous, and irrational. Even people that are believers in Christ sometimes will think, hey, you know what? You're giving way too much to God. You need to hold some of that back in order to make sure that you have enough for your future. You know, one thing, Alicia, I remember one time she got like $100, right there. She got like $100, something, I forgot what it was, and she just wanted to give the whole thing away. And I remember thinking in my head, and I think I made this comment to her, hey, you know what? Why don't you just keep some of that for yourself, because you don't know what you may need in the future, and why don't you just give some of that away? Maybe God's Spirit was speaking to her in a way that I didn't understand. And I quenched what was going on inside of her in her heart. And I think of that with this woman. She gave all of what she had for the most part. She probably didn't have much more when she gave this vial of perfume in a way to honor God. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it's the same idea. This nard that comes out of India, very similar idea. It's a very kind of precious, extremely potent. Yeah. Yep, it does, and it will fill the entire room. Yeah. Verse 3 shows us the beautiful act. Actually, let me back this up for a second here. Well, verse 3 shows the beautiful act that she gave. And in verse 8, the very beginning of it, just to give a little side note here real quick, it says, she has done what she could. And the idea there is this. It's not that she kind of did what she could at the time. I mean, what I have in front of me, I'm just going to do it. The actual better way to say this is she gave all she had. Not just she did what she could. She gave all that she had at that moment. Of everything that she had resource-wise, she gave it to Christ. A beautiful act. And there's a second thing I want to look at is this. It's in verses 4 and 5. And like I said a second ago, our beautiful acts towards God can look ridiculous. They can be reckless. They can even look irrational. They can look even sometimes not practical. Sometimes they even seem, out of order, as in like our priorities are kind of screwed up. And we look at verses 4 and 5. It says, some of those at the table were indignant. Why waste such expensive perfume? More than likely, this was Judas that started this whole why waste this perfume. But the picture, it wasn't just Judas. It was those sitting at the tables. Probably the disciples too probably jumped in. Yeah, you know what? Why are you doing that? Why waste such expensive perfume? Oftentimes when we do something like this, people on the outside are going to look at us and they're going to think, your priorities are messed up. Non-believers will look at us and they think this kind of stuff, this is weird. Why would you sit here and you sing these songs and you read this ancient book that this doesn't make sense. Why would you give money to your church? You know, pastors, they're a bunch of thieves, so why would you trust them? Right? I mean, that's some of the mindset that's out there. And I think some of what is going on here is there's a comparison between Judas and this lady. Her act, Mary is probably Mary, by the way, Martha's sister. The Mary that is spoken of in Luke that would sit at Jesus' feet and listen as much as she could. Mary gave an absolutely selfish act. Judas's heart was not of selflessness, it was of selfishness. It was of, what am I going to get out? So what does this do for us? Because in John chapter 12, you see John tells the story, and it talks about how Judas is the one who said, why would you waste such expensive perfume? You could have used that money to feed the poor, to take care of the poor. That's a good thing. Jesus even said, go take care of the poor. Jesus even said you should feed the hungry. In James it says that true religion is those who take care of the orphans and the poor and the widows. So Judas didn't say something that was really wrong, but his priorities were screwed up. Hey, his priorities were totally screwed up. Because Judas, if you read in John chapter 12, he was about the money. It was the greed. And it talks about how he would take some of the money from the purse and he would pretty much put it in his own pocket. Her act was selfless, his was selfish. She was willing to give all. Judas and the disciples, they were only willing to give enough. You could use that to feed the poor. Well, that's a good thing. Her priorities were right. Their priorities were wrong. Jesus said, right, he said, you know, the poor you'll always have with you. I'm not always going to be here. I'm about to die. I'm about to go on. Take this moment now while you have it to sit and be with me. And I think there's something important in that for us because her priority was right. Jesus first. Love God. And then love others. Because you cannot love others first and you cannot love others in the right way without loving God first. Right? God loved us first so that we can love others. When we begin to pour ourselves into and look at what God's love looks like for us, we can then begin to love others in a good and right, beautiful way. We know how to sacrifice. We know what unselfishness looks like. We know we can begin to understand what it means to have no strings attached in our love, where we're willing to love to the point of where we may get taken advantage of you. A couple verses that talk about putting God first. Matthew 6:33. Anybody know what that says? But seek the kingdom of God
Seek ye first the
first.
kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you.
Yeah, that end is more like that, or and all these things shall be added to you. That's a if and then kind of thing. So there's a first and then there's a second. Seek God's kingdom first. Yeah. Matthew 13:44-46. That's the parable of the guy who's walking along and he finds this treasure in the field. So what does he do? He buries the treasure. Huh? Repeat. Oh, Matthew. Matthew 13:44-46. Thank you for reminding me. It's the parable of the guy who's walking through the field, and there's a treasure out there, and he realizes that treasure is worth everything. So what does he do? He goes, he hides it, he goes back, and he sells everything he has because that over there is more important than all he has over here. And the picture is this: the treasure is Christ. It's who and what he is. Willing to sell everything we have, willing to get rid of all, put all of that aside because we want Christ. He is our everything. Colossians 3:17. Any of my kids remember that one? Whatever you do. Yeah, whatever you do in word or deed, do it all unto the Lord and not to man. And the picture is the priority is Christ. It's God. It's for him, not for others. So here's a question I have in this. And this is pretty simple. Do you give God your best, or do you give him the leftovers? Do you give him what you have after you have already taken care of all the rest? Is he your first priority? I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this very gingerly, because this is not meant to be a guilt trip. This is not meant to hit anybody in the gut. But a lot of times this is what we do, and this is just to get the picture across sometimes of how we think. We have a couch in our house. We have some appliance. It's a car. It's an instrument. Whatever. And what do we do with that thing that we're going to get rid of? Because we're going to buy a new one for us. What do we do with it?
Give it to the church.
We give it to the church.
Because it's wore
Because it's wore
out.
out. Because it's something we no longer want for ourselves because it's not good enough for us. That's not to be a sucker punch. So that's not what it's meant to be. I know, but it is. But it's not meant to be. But the picture is there. And it's not to say it's about the church as much as it's the motive behind is really important for us to wrestle with. Let's go back to Mary. Her motive was, I'm going to give it all to Christ. I'm pouring it all out. I'm holding nothing back. I'm even willing to cross a cultural line that could get me in big trouble. Because he is everything to me. Her priorities were right. Her priorities were good. It was a beautiful act, not because of what she did, but because of who she was doing it for and why she did it. And then in verse 9, I want us to see this next part, because I think this is super important to grasp in all of this, is this. It's the legacy that was left behind because of her willingness to be ridiculous, reckless, and irrational in her love with Jesus. To the point where she said, he's everything, all this other is just second. I don't care what anybody says, I'm just going to give her everything, give him everything. Verse 9 says, I tell you the truth, wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed. 2,000 years later, we're talking about it. It's part of the gospel message. It has a legacy. It has an impact, a lasting impact. But at the time, did it really mean that much to many people? No, they missed it. The guys that should have got it, who were hanging out with Jesus for 3 years, heard about him talking about, hey, I'm going to die, and I'm going to be going away for a little while. The temple's going to be destroyed, be risen in 3 days. What are you talking about, Jesus? In the next part of the chapter of Mark 14, we're going to see that Judas betrayed him, Peter denies him, and then all of Israel, crucify him! Right? I mean, they didn't get it at that time what she was doing. She looked like the idiot. But she didn't care. She left a legacy. Sometimes when we do the right thing, it's not going to be felt right now. Sometimes when we follow Christ, it's not going to have an impact right now. Maybe it won't even be for another year or two. Sometimes that impact is after you're dead and gone. I mean, how many people we know that at somebody's funeral, they, wow, you know what, their life really did touch me. I didn't realize that. I mean, that happens every once in a while. And it's kind of interesting because her impact really had, and her impact, or her actions, her love for Jesus had an impact upon 3 people. 3 sets of people, actually. First off, on Jesus, because what does he do? He says, he stands between her and them and says, hey, you back off. The thing that she's doing, this is beautiful. It's important for us to remember that, because she responded out of love for Christ, and he came and he stepped in to be there for her, to be there with her. And he praised her for it. And he even rewarded her in a huge way, because guess what? Her story has been told for centuries, for thousands of years now. There's another group of people that her response had an impact on. Judas and the disciples. The impact upon Judas, it wasn't a positive one. And we got to remember that sometimes, you know, our honoring Christ is not going to make people happy. Sometimes it's going to cause conflict. Sometimes it's going to cause them to come up against us. Keep your head in the game. Keep your eyes focused on the priority. It's about Jesus and what he's doing. Let him stand in the gap for us. Let him be the one to stand up in our place. We don't have to come back after him. I do think it's important to stand firm, as Ephesians 6 talks about, but let God be the one to work inside their heart. We don't have to find a way to get them. Jesus stood up in the gap. But the hard part is it didn't make a difference in Judas's life. The disciples, though, I think that they looked back and they went, I get it now. Because who wrote about it? A couple of disciples. They told the story.
He was about to die a criminal's death, and he was not a criminal.
Correct. Yeah.
Criminals aren't anointed.
Criminals are not anointed. You actually thought about it. We could talk about the anointing part of it. Because in Old Testament, a king was anointed, a prophet was anointed, a priest is anointed. Jesus is prophet, priest, and king. You would anoint somebody who was a guest at your table, because you're basically saying, I'm setting you apart, I want to honor you, you're important. And then you see, like Jesus, when he was baptized, and when he started forth in his ministry, God himself said, hey, this is my anointed son, which is the Messiah. That's the point of being the Messiah, because he is the anointed one. He's the one set apart to do the only act that only one person could ever do, and that was Christ himself.
It also says he was specific. He himself said that she anointed me for my death.
Yeah. Which that was a thing of that you would, the burial process. Which that's part of the thing. I think she sat at his feet and she was starting to get what was going on. She heard what Jesus was saying because he was the priority. It wasn't about her agenda for the future and what she's going to get out of it and how it's going to make her life and everybody else's life. It was about Christ and Christ alone. I guess it's the simple thing that I want to pass on this morning is this. Is Christ our first priority? Is he getting our best, or are we giving him what we got left over? Are we willing to cross certain lines to look ridiculous, reckless, and irrational because of our love for him, because of who he is? Or are we kind of holding back a little bit, kind of hiding that? I mean, putting it out there enough where it's easy to put it out there, but we're hiding it where it's not so easy. Are we willing to give him our all? And I'll tell you, if you're willing to give your all, it's going to be a beautiful thing. It's going to be a beautiful act that has a legacy. Because the perfume, think about this, the perfume that was poured on Christ, it wasn't just between her and him. Everybody else's senses began to be filled with that perfume. And when we follow Christ, when he's our first and foremost, as it talks about in Ephesians 5:1 and 2, where it says, be imitators of God, therefore as dearly loved children. And it talks about being a sacrifice as a fragrant offering. That fragrant offering of you're pouring yourself out for Christ is going to fill the noses of other people. Some will receive it. Some will come up against it. Some won't even receive it, but then they'll end up receiving it. So are we willing to surrender all? Are we willing to give all? Because he is everything. And everything he is about is what worth us being about that same thing. A lot of us have been believers for a long time, so here's the challenge in this. That kind of a question can sometimes seem very elementary. Well, yeah, I've given my life. I've been following Christ. I go to church. I serve. I do this kind of thing. But I want us to really sit back and question our motive. Are we truly giving him our all, or are we giving him just enough to be able to move on to the next stage? Are we in full surrender or not? You know, I dare say this, and I'll shut up here, but I dare say this. I dare say this. Are there some of us that have this stirring in our heart to serve, and we're just not doing it because, well, it's a little hard. What are the reasons for not doing it? You know, I will never forget, and I've mentioned this a long time ago to you guys, but I remember my grandma, 98 years old, was frustrated because she couldn't see, she couldn't hear, and so she couldn't go to church, she didn't know how to serve, and she told my aunt one day, she said something along the lines of, you know, why is God keeping me here? Why am I here? What's the point? And my aunt's response was perfect. You can pray. That's the most powerful tool we got in our box. Yeah, because prayer is the very picture of God, less of me, more of you. God, I don't have the answers here. I'm coming to you because you do. God, I don't know how to work this out. I don't have the strength, but you know what? I know you're the source of my strength. We all have we can all serve to some degree. You know, I used to hear this all the time with my previous church leading the youth. Well, you know, I would help out, but you know, the youth are, I'm old. They're gonna think I'm kind of weird because I just can't connect with them. I'm starting to understand that. But I'll tell you this: there is a a language that is felt and received more powerfully than just heard. It's the act of love. It's the act of presence. It's the act of, hey, I'm going to pour worth into you because, I see value in you. There's something powerful about that, and that will cross all kinds of cultural lines and barriers. For some, maybe it's this. Maybe we do feel like, we're holding back on giving God something, some kind of resource we have. Maybe it's money, financial kind of thing. And that's been stirring in your heart for a while, but you're, I don't know, I need this for this. Who's getting your first fruits? There's all kinds of things. We put our jobs first. Maybe we get up in the morning, and some of us have been in this place where, I do my devotions in the morning, but I can't wake up early enough. That's a lame excuse. And I'm just going to say this. We can get up for fishing. We can get up early for hunting. We can get up early for our jobs. We can get up in the middle of the night if our kid is crying or hurting or sick, barfing. But we can't get up for Jesus? Come on. And I'm saying that, I'm pointing fingers here. When one points that way, there's a lot coming back this direction, I'm telling you. We can do that. So here's the big thing is this. I just leave this with us. I want us to search our hearts. Are we really surrendering, pouring all out to Christ, or giving Him our everything? Are we really treating Him in a way of honor, respect, and response in worship that says, Jesus, you laid down your life for me, the best. I'm going to give you the best I got. It's not good enough, I understand. But this is what I got, and I'm giving it to you. And then watch what He does with that, because the legacy that may follow may surprise you. So let me pray, and then, yes. Yes. Dave would love to do that. Like I did that. Yeah, we can do that. Okay. Actually, I've got one in my head that we're going to do. Oh, no. I got one. I do. Actually, and it fits very perfect. So, Father, thanks for this morning, God. Thanks for your word. And, Lord, as we get ready to leave this place again, watch over us, care for us. But, God, as we leave, as we walk away this morning, may you continually stir in our hearts to think about the sacrifice you gave for us. Teach us to be like Mary, who was willing to do whatever it took to A, be in your presence, but also B, to worship you. Lord, may we do that too. Lord, we love you. We thank you for what you do. And God, we with all of our feeble efforts, God, we're going to surrender what we got to you. In your Son's name, amen. I do have one in my head.